Hello, I'm Stefan Greber. I'm the project leader for Linux containers and one of the maintainers of Incus. And this is going to be your first look at Incus 6.1, which we've just released a few days ago. Took a little while to actually come out with the announcement and the video because I've been busy reviewing actually a lot of contributions coming into Incus right around the same time. But yeah, this is going to be a look at Incus 6.1. Just before getting into the list of what's new and demo and all of that, just wanted to mention that Incus 6.1 is not an LTS release. The last release of Incus 6.0, that is an LTS release that comes with 5 years of support, and it's going to get some bug fix releases numbered 601, 602, 603, etc. Incus 6.1 is a normal monthly feature release, so it's only supported until Incus 6.2. And in general, if you're running like production critical environments, you're probably going to want to stick to the LTS instead of going with this release. All right. So definitely one of the highlights for this release, and actually going to be even more true with Incus 6.2, is the number of contributions that we've been dealing with. And that's mostly thanks to a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, who has his virtualization class students contribute to open source projects, and a lot of them chose to contribute to Incus. That means that the 40 plus smaller issues we had open were very quickly picked up by all of those students, and most of them have been resolved at this point. I actually have probably a dozen more that I need to review and sort out for Incus 6.2. So you're going to see a lot of small kind of quality of life improvements really in this release. And a lot of those are actually going to end up making it into the LTS. As for the LTS release, we do backport quality of life improvements, improvement to the CLIs, that kind of stuff. All right, so what's new in 6.1? All right, so starting with a bit of a larger feature, one thing that 6.1 supports now is more flexibility on creating ZFS pools. That's particularly useful if you're dealing with a cluster, you're dealing with remote systems, and your only real way to interact with them is through the Incus API. Up until now, your only option through the API was to use a single disk and get a ZFS pool on top of that. That does not provide replication, that doesn't really provide all of the safety that you might want, but now we have a syntax that supports that. So now it's possible to set the source key when you create a ZFS pool to be a device, comma, second device that will just create a simple striping setup, so RAID 0. That doesn't get you any kind of redundancy, that actually makes it worse in that case, but gets you a higher capacity. And then you've got some more options. You can do mirror equals and then 2 devices, or actually more than 2 if you want. And those will just end up getting the exact same data by setting up a mirror within ZFS. Or you can do RAID Z1 equals and then a bunch of devices, and you're gonna get a RAID Z1. RAID Z1 is roughly an equivalent of a traditional RAID 5, so that means you can lose one of the disk and the parity data spread across all of the others will make up for that. RAID Z2 is an equivalent of traditional RAID 6, so you can effectively lose 2 of the devices in that scenario. Finding those different devices or partitions, very easy because our resources API makes all of the disk information available over the network. And that even lets you check on like multiple machines within a cluster and then set up your ZFS pools that way. So that's going to be very useful for automating the deployment of Incus. And it's actually a feature I needed to do a better job at storage handling inside of our new Incus deploy tool, which currently for local pools only uses a single device and is therefore not particularly highly available on that front. So this is going to make it possible to at least mirror across 2 devices, if not support even more devices than that within that tool. All right. Then looking at some of the features that were contributed by students, that one was not, that one was contributed by another community member. First feature contributed by students is the ability to list profiles across projects. So you might already be familiar with the ability of doing that, but for instances. So we're really working towards getting the all projects flag to work across all of our objects, and that's now profile supporting that. Continuing on the same vein, we've got the exact same thing for network zones. So network zones also support all projects now. And there are actually a number more of those changes that have already been merged and will be in Incus 6.2. So there's a very good chance that with Incus 6.2, we'll actually have every single object within the API supporting the all projects flag and letting you easily get an overview of everything within your Incus deployment, regardless of what project things actually belong to. Alrighty. Next one is for cluster users. So within a cluster, you may or may not be familiar with that, but when you deploy instances and you don't tell Incus where you want them, it's gonna simply pick whichever machine has the fewest instance at that given point in time. That's usually fine if you're running a lot of instances and you've got machines that are roughly the same. That will do a decent job at spreading things. If you want something more complex, we do support scriptlets. So it's kind of a Python-like syntax that you can upload as a config within Incus. And then every time it needs to place something, it will call that script with some fixed arguments. Basically, things like what is the instance request itself, what's the reason for needing placement, and what are the potential servers it could be placed on. And then the script can do whatever checks it wants. And then after that, call a function to tell Incus, go and place it on that particular machine. So that works great. And it does have a number of functions available to pull resource information from specific servers, to pull some instance sizing information, like how large is the instance expected to be, that kind of stuff. But what it didn't currently have was the ability to get like kind of cluster-wide big set of information. So to do that, we've got two new functions in this release. One is get instances, which lets you actually pull the instance definition data from the entire deployment, an entire cluster if you want, or restrict that to just specific server, or restrict it to a specific project, or restrict it to both project and location. So that makes it easy to look at what other workloads might be on the given server or might already be within the same project, and then make placement decision based on that. Like within a project, it could be that you don't want all of your instances to end up on the same server and want to better spread. So you can get that and use that function to get that kind of information. Or on a location, you can look at what else is running already on the potential target server and then decide that actually not the right server, we should go somewhere else. The other function was added is get cluster members. So that actually lets you list all of the servers within the cluster. It can be filtered by group, which can be useful as well. So if you've got cluster groups and you want to only look at, say, the set of servers you use to place containers, for example, then you can do that. And it gets you the normal information on each of the servers, so like their current status, what else do we get? IP address, name, that kind of stuff. So that also makes it kind of easier to get a better overview of the entire cluster rather than just being provided the names of the servers that are considered to be candidates for placement. So that just gives you a bunch more flexibility in what you can do in the scripts. Actually, Incus 6.2 is going to get an additional function that got merged yesterday, which is going to also allow for pulling information about projects, especially things like restrictions on projects. So that's pretty useful. I think actually the get cluster members, one of the things that's useful is you can pull its configuration, including user config keys. So you could now start putting things like user.foo equals some value on one of your cluster members, and then have your placement logic be able to be like, oh, actually instance has this config key, therefore it needs to go on something that's got users foo set to bar or something like that. Anyway, that's just more flexibility. Scriptlets are really useful for us for providing features that would be extremely difficult to fully model ourselves, like modeling a full scheduler with all of the potential options and trying to cover everyone's use case is nearly impossible. And this actually makes it pretty easy for people to just effectively write down their policy as a script, upload that, and then have Incus just run it. Alrighty. Next up is some CLI changes. So one of them, again, it's kind of that kind of topic where like we're trying to make things more consistent, kind of like the old projects thing from earlier. So it's just cases where we had a few comments in the API, in the CLI doing something, but not all of them. So we've been going for consistency and adding features throughout. So one of them is the ability to feed YAML data to a create command. So instead of having to create something and do a bunch of set commands to configure it the way you want, you can just feed the end result as YAML and then have the full object treated in one shot. That was supported for quite a while in Incus create and Incus launch, as well as some other commands, but some of them were not really documented that they supported it, and a bunch of others just plain did not support it. So with this release, we've got a bunch of commands that now support that. There's still a few more to go. I think we're probably like 3 or 4 away from being completely done. So Incus 6.2 is going to have full coverage for that. Incus 6.1 is most of the way there. In the same vein, customizable columns in the CLI. So same thing, Incus list and a few of those Incus image lists and a few others on that list. I've had that for a while, where it's possible for you to tell the CLI you only want to see those 2 or 3 different columns, and really kind of customize your output. Makes it particularly convenient if you then combine that with the CSV output, so you can easily get a very scriptable output from the CLI. That's very convenient, but also was not widely available. So now we've added a whole bunch more commands that support it. And I think there too, there's still a few that are missing it, but I expect the gap to be basically closed in 6.2. Alrighty. Next up, we've got stateful migration for containers. So we've supported that from the beginning of LexD and then Incus, but it's never been behind a flag. So that means that if we needed to, say, prevent you from attempting a stateful snapshot or migration or something like that of a container that's got like a GPU attached or something like that, there was no way to put a flag like we do for virtual machines. Given that we've got the migration stateful flag to control exactly that for virtual machines, it made sense to also expand it and apply it to containers. So that's what we've got now. Effectively, if you want to use any of the stateful features, whether it's stateful stop, stateful snapshot, or live migration of containers, now you're going to have to set migration stateful to true before any of that is allowed. Do keep in mind that Creo, which is the tool that makes all of this possible, is not generally able to do that for most normal container instances. To the point where I'm not even sure I'll be able to demo that after, because I don't think I've got any container that's actually supported by Creo right now. So for most users, it's not going to make any difference because realistically nobody's been using that. But it is a bit more convenient in that the error messages are going to be a lot clearer. We've had a number of cases where people have been trying to accidentally live migrate a container when they actually wanted to do a stateless migration, so like a stop, move, start back. And so for that use case, now they're going to get an error telling them clearly that, hey, you can't do any kind of stateful operation on this instance, which is going to be a lot better than what we've had so far. All right, next one is oven related. So on the oven side, one feature that was kind of missing for environments, well, actually I ran into that in my own production environment. If you're dealing with a lot of network traffic, say you're running public facing DNS servers that get completely hammered, or even like occasionally get attacked, it's really problematic when all of your network rules are stateful, because for every single connection, you're hitting the state table, you're going to record things, those entries need to time out, and you end up with millions, if not tens of millions of entries that are just slowing everything down and actually causing more problems just on their own. So to handle that, the normal solution is to just make that kind of traffic use stateless rules. So you've got less flexibility. You need to make sure you handle your ingress and egress because there's not going to be any kind of state tracking whatsoever. But you can handle much, much higher throughput because you don't need to create all of those state entries. So now with Incus 6.1, we do have support for that. It's called allow stateless. It's just an action you can set in your ACL. You save the ACL and you're done. This gets you a stateless rule. And the last one on the list, is it the last one? What was the last one? Is the instance uptime information. So we have a few timestamps attached to instances within Incus. We've got the creation time, we've got the last time they were used, which usually is the last startup time, but not always. It can be the last time it's been like snapshotted or modified or that kind of stuff. Now we've got another timestamp which is exposed as part of the state information of the instance, and it's when it was started. So that effectively gets you the uptime, so how long that instance has been up. And it's being exposed now inside of Incus info and can be used as a column in Incus list. So it makes it pretty easy to just get a bit of a feel for how long has this thing been around. For me, the real reason for that was that I've got on-demand created GitHub action runners on my Incus cluster. And that project can be pretty busy with like tens, if not hundreds of instances at time. And I'm never really sure whether it cleans itself up properly or if stuff gets stuck. So with this, I can very easily check whether everything is reasonably recent, like say the past 24 hours, and go and clean up the rest effectively. So that makes it pretty convenient. And there was another one contributed by students. So was the ACL, and so was migration.stateful. Like pretty much all of those came from students. And the last one, also contributed by students, is a bit of an improvement for cluster evacuation, but also for those using Oven. So up until now, when you evacuated a cluster, it evacuated all the instances or stopped everything, and so nothing else was left running on the system, but it never actually deactivated the networks. You'd think it's not really an issue because you don't have anything running on them, so that's fine. But with Oven, not having any instances running on them doesn't mean that the local machine is not acting as one of the gateway chassis, one of the virtual routers effectively for a bunch of those networks. Which then means that if you then bring the machine down, Oven might have very little notice to go and reshuffle that to another machine, which might cause a bit of network traffic drop. That's not ideal. So with this release, what we do is as part of the evacuation, the last step, once all instances are gone, is to shut down all the networks on the machine as well. And when the Incus comes back online, it's not going to bring the networks back up. It's only going to do that just prior to restoring the instances. So it means you can actually apply updates, reboot the machines a bunch of times, and they will never act as a Oven chassis. They will only do it again once you start restoring the machine in the cluster. And that's it for the new releases in Incus 6.1. So just gonna go quickly do a bit of demo. Some of those I can't really demo in a meaningful, useful way, like that last one with cluster evacuations. It's not really visible at all. It's like, to me, it was just showing us some packet drops here and there, and it's actually pretty hard to figure out exactly where things are at and really show that this all works. But it does. But for some of the others, a lot more visual and can actually show those. All right. So first up is the creation of complex ZFS pools. So for that, I created a VM, which is V1 here. If I go in there and we go look at the resources API for it, we can see that it's got 4 disks. So we see disk 0, 1, 2, the all NVMe drives 20 gigs large, and then the system drive is 20 gigs here. So now I believe I've got just a basic directory storage on there. So say I want to create a ZFS pool. So just call it my pool, like that. ZFS, and then the source, and let's do RAID Z2, I guess, and do dev, and what are the devices? NVMe 0 and 1, 1 and 1, 2 and 1. All right. So let's do that. NVMe 0 and 1, dev NVMe 1 and 1, dev NVMe 2 and 1. All right, created. And if we go look at the ZFS config, we can see it's my pool. It's got one ZDev called RAID, that's a RAID Z2, and it's got 3 devices inside of it for a total capacity of, what should we get to that? Like 20-ish gigs. Sure. Yeah, it looks like. So that does allow for the full loss of one of the drives, so that's all good. All right, so that's the new ZFS feature, and you've got a bunch of options, like doing a RAID Z1 across 3 drives is a bit limited usually. That's why I show all of the examples with 5, that's a bit more meaningful. But yeah, you get to choose mirrors, RAID Z1, RAID Z2. You've got a bit of flexibility there. Now, listing of profiles across projects. Okay, well, first thing for that, we need to have multiple projects, right? So let's create foo, let's create bar, and then if I do profile list, I'll just see my current project. And if I do all projects, we see them all across now. So that's pretty easy, just works as expected here. The next one is around network zones. So kind of the same thing here. Network zone create. I'm not sure it will let me do that actually. Let me see. Network zones are not enabled. Okay, so we'll just need to go and turn that on. So bar features network zones, true, and networks.zone. Yeah, there we go. So that's on bar, that's on foo, and now I should be able to network zone create bar.example.net in project bar and foo.example.net in project foo. And if I do zone list, I don't see anything in default. If I do it across all projects, there we go. So that works as expected as well. And as mentioned, like we're going to be rolling that out across more and more objects so that the entire API supports that effectively, which will make it a lot easier to get an overview of what's going on your Incus deployment. The placement stuff, I can't easily show that. I would need a cluster, I would need placement script in place and a bunch of logging and stuff to show it. Took me a little while to actually test and debug this thing and make sure it all worked properly the other day. But if you're someone who's using a cluster and has been playing with the scriptlet, feel free to give that a shot. It should be pretty useful for you and gives you a bit more flexibility. The documentation does have some example of what a scriptlet looks like. As mentioned, it's really just Python syntax, but you just can't do anything too fancy. Like you can't import anything, you can't use any function outside of what's exposed. But you do get to do loops, you do get to inspect objects. It's very flexible, very convenient. All right, and then using YAML to create command for the different create commands within the Incus CLI. What would be a good example of that? So we could create a network ACL maybe. So let's just create one the old-fashioned way first. So let's call it first and rule add first ingress action allow. Okay, so we'll just have it allow all ingress, all egress. Okay. Okay, so that's the rule we have. Let's just write it down as YAML and then do ACL create second and load that back. And we can see it's complaining about a couple of fields that are set in there which are not not part of initial creation. So that's the name and the used by. So we can just go and remove those two and fill it again. There we go. And now we've got our first ACL and our second ACL. So that's kind of a general concept. The same works for all of the other commands. Basically the same input as show is allowed, minus any of the fields that are effectively read-only and not part of initial creation. All right. Then customizable columns for the Incus CLI. So you're probably familiar with this one, except I don't have any instances running. So let me just fix that. There we go. Just quickly creating an instance. Okay, let's do a second one. Okay. All right. So we've got that running. Now you can do column and say I just want name, state, the type, and yeah, just do that. That works. If it's clustered, you can also list the location, you can list the project. There are a bunch of different columns you could show, like the memory consumption, was it CPU consumption? What's the CPU one? I should remember what the syntax is for the CPU one. CPU usage in seconds is U, okay. All right. So yeah, you get to play with those columns on Incus list. That's been around for a while. Now let's pick one that's new. I think profile is new. Project is definitely new. So if we list the projects, we've got a lot of different features, but you may just want the name and description, and that way you can easily do it, easily get just information that you want. So that's true across all of those commands, and whatever has not been covered yet will be in 6.2. Migration stateful. All right, so that should be an easy one because we don't have it set currently. So in the past, if I was to do this, I'm actually kind of surprised. Why is that? Okay, looks like we've got a bit of a bug here. Actually, let me purposefully set it to false, see if that fixes that. Incus, oops, config set. It might be an issue with the default value. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm going to send a quick fix for that one. But that's basically the behavior we expect. The old behavior is actually what showed up because of the bug. So that could be that, which is kind of confusing. Especially actually well, I can't do live migration easily. But like if you were to do a move between two servers, you would get a big wall of error like that and not really understand what's going on, when actually what it's trying to tell you is that live migration didn't work, but you potentially didn't want a live migration, and it just gets confusing. So with the new behavior, it's gonna be like that instead, which just says stateful stop requires the instance to have migration stateful set to true, and just stops you right there. So that will make it a bit easier to figure out what's going on in general, minus the little bug we need to fix here. So that's migration stateful. Stateless ACLs on Oven. Might be able to, probably not gonna, the server I'm gonna be using now doesn't actually have the new Incus version on it yet, but I can show you just a general idea. So if I look at my cluster and I look at my public DNS servers, that would be that. Yeah, so that's the ACLs I'm currently using for some of my public DNS servers. And the general ingress, what is it? Ingress, yeah, incoming DNS, for example, those are currently allow rules. They should switch to allow stateless, and egress should then be also added for port 53 source going to anywhere being also allowed. That way, all of that DNS traffic doesn't keep creating state entries, and that should save a whole bunch of CPU and be particularly useful if someone is trying to attack my DNS servers, as has been the case a few times in the past. So that's the stateless rules in Oven. Instance uptime, I actually almost showed it by accident earlier. But if we go back to our list example, so list and name and status and type. Now, if I want to also see when it was started, I can do capital U, and that shows it right there. If I do Incus info, same thing. We now have created, last used, started. As mentioned, in this case, they're all the same thing because it was literally created and started immediately. So the last time it was reconfigured was the same time it was created, which was also the same time it was started. On longer running instances, that's potentially not going to be true. And like an instance self-restarting itself should see started be reset when the other two timestamps are not touched. Alrighty, and the last one I mentioned, I can't really go over that because it's not really user visible, but that's the cluster evacuation that also stops the Oven networks. So that's it for Incus 6.1. As mentioned, if you're running a production environment, you should probably stick to 6.0 LTS. But for anyone else, 6.1 is around. It's been pushed to the usual places. We're gonna have to see what the new distributions do. I expect that some of the distros that are more like rolling release type distros will pick up 6.1 as their version of choice, whereas the more stable distros, things like Debian, Ubuntu, the Red Hat based ones maybe, are likely to stick to the LTS instead because that better fits their model. In any case, if you're using my own packages on either Debian or Ubuntu, you'll find that we've got 3 repos for that. There's daily, there's stable, and there's LTS 6.0. So if you use stable, you're getting 6.1 right now already. If you want to stay on 6.0, go and switch to the LTS before doing any update. It's not possible to downgrade from 6.1 to 6.0, at least not without having to jump through a few hoops. So just make sure to do the right thing there. And thanks to everyone who contributed to this release. It's probably one of the releases with the most contributors. 6.2 is likely to beat that number. But yeah, it's very exciting, very great to see. And I'll see you in the next video. If you've got any questions, leave them down below in the comment section, go on the community forum, and enjoy Incus 6.1. Bye.